In the neonatal unit, we look after small babies. That means babies who are born before time, which we call preterm babies. We also look after sick babies. Sick babies, both the small babies and the babies who are born at normal term. So any newborn baby, the first 28 days of life, who's got any problem, illness or abnormal development, baby born with abnormality, that baby will be under our care. And the small babies, like preterm babies, because they stay in hospital much longer, we'll look after those babies until they are discharged. And then those who've got problems, we also follow them up for as long as they've got problems. But most of the time, generally up to a year to 2 years in terms of life, in terms of the follow-up. Neonatal unit at Baragwanath Hospital, I believe is the largest in the country. Currently, we've got about 179 beds, what we call usable beds, although original gazetted number of beds is 120. So I believe it's the largest in the country. So looking at the neonatal unit in terms of the equipment, we've got equipment that varies from equipment that just focuses on vital signs, what we call pulse oximeters or machines that measure blood pressure, up to the equipment that deals with that is used in babies who are critically ill in terms of sustaining their life until they are better from the condition. So one of the equipment that not everyone has in the country, especially in the public sector, mainly the tertiary hospitals will have that kind of equipment, is what we call equipment that provides inhaled nitric oxide, which helps to open up the vessels in the lungs that might close down for different reasons. And that kind of equipment will make that baby to survive. But if you don't have that equipment, a number of babies in the past were dying because we do not have that. The other equipment that we have is that looking at the babies who got what we call asphyxia, or born without having enough oxygen and enough blood circulating in the brain, research has shown that if you start cooling those babies within the first 6 hours, that means dropping their temperatures between 33 and 34 degrees Celsius from the normal temperature of 36.5 to 37.5. So if you keep those babies cold, then you tend to reduce the neurological injury or the death in those babies if you cool them for the first in the first 6 hours, starting in the first 6 hours of life up to 72 hours of life. So we are one of the few hospitals that have got that facility. I know a number of hospitals have got that facility, but I think we're one of the few who started using that facility, especially in Gauteng. So being in the public hospital or any other hospital when it comes to neonatal care, one would look at the 3 or 4 areas. One is a question of space in terms of the wards. Number 2 is a question of human resources in terms of the staff. And then number 3 is a question of equipment. So if we're to start with the equipment, I think when it comes to the equipment, we've got the same kind of equipment as in the private sector. So I would understand if somebody goes to the private sector because of the equipment, because the equipment that is used commonly in neonates that makes babies to survive, Baragwanath has got that equipment. So people, if they go for equipment reasons, I'm not sure what equipment they are looking for. Number 2, in terms of the human resources, yes, we might have limited in terms of numbers as compared to the private sector. But in terms of the training, our hospital is an academic hospital. Therefore, we train doctors who are going to be specialists and go to private practice. They are trained in this hospital. Number of nurses who are out in the private sector, they are trained in this hospital. So in terms of the skills, we've got enough doctors and nurses who've got the skills in our hospital. So I think if you were to look at the private sector, most of them come from hospitals like Baragwanath, which are academic and public sector. So again, you want the best doctor. To me, the best place to go to is the public sector. But not only that, the advantage of the public sector is that if you go to the private sector, it's one-on-one. So you go into your doctor, who is your private doctor, and that doctor, sometimes they work on themselves, by themselves. Sometimes, if you are lucky, they work as a group. But the advantage of a public sector is that you've got all doctors coming together to do the rounds. You've got different opinions. So it's not one person that if you miss something and you don't think about it, that baby might suffer or problem might pick up late. So whereas in the public sector, we come as a group, you might have 10 doctors who are all experienced, professors, senior specialists, we've got all the experience. So that's one advantage that I would say public sector has. Now, when it comes to the space, yes, because the majority of people in the country don't have medical aids. So they come to the public sector. And also looking at the movement of people into Gauteng, there are a lot of people who come into Gauteng either from other provinces and also from other countries. And therefore a space becomes a challenge. Sure, if you want to have comfort and have few people around you, sure, the private sector then might be better for you. But I think, and sure, because of the overcrowding that we have in the public sector, the private sector might have an advantage that at least you might have less chances of being exposed to things like infection because there's less overcrowding in the private sector. So the success rate will depend on the diseases that we're dealing with. So there are some areas where that we're doing well, there are some areas that we're not doing very well. And so in the areas, if we pick up the problem in time, then most of the time, those babies under our care will do very well. But those who come in late, then we're going to have problems. So for example, one of the conditions that we deal with quite commonly is where the baby is born with the bowel outside. So those kind of patients are either referred from other hospitals or they are born with us. So in that area, if they're coming from outside, then there's a delay in closing the abdomen. So we tend not to do well in those cases. So looking at the premature babies, there's been an improvement in terms of survival in those babies because with the equipment that we have, starting these patients on ventilator support early, those babies survive most of the time. The only problem is that with overcrowding, then they might develop infection and develop complications later. But we've seen an improvement in the survival of the babies who are premature.